The voice that crackled over the encrypted radio channel was not one of command, but of desperate ground-level truth. It was a voice stripped of all military decorum, raw with the static of gunfire and the immediacy of death. All stations, Valkyrie Actual. Iron Wolf, stand by. I say again, Iron Wolf, you are cleared hot. We trust your eyes. In that frozen moment, suspended over a bloody Afghan valley, a Marine gunnery sergeant named Marcus overturned an entire chain of command. He was placing the lives of his 12-man team squarely into the hands of a pilot the United States Air Force had persistently treated like a cadet. This single, defiant act of trust would change everything. But in the cockpit of her A-10C Thunderbolt II, Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Iron Wolf, had no time to process its significance. The world had narrowed to the crosshairs on her heads-up display, the shudder of her airframe, and the urgent, fading voices of men counting on her to perform a miracle. The valley they called the Devil's Throat lived up to its name. From her altitude, it was a jagged scar of brown rock and deep shadows, but through the ears of her radio, it was a hellscape. She could hear the staccato rhythm of AK-47s, the heavier thump of a PKM machine gun, and the strained, controlled breaths of the JTAC, the Joint Terminal Air Controller, as he tried to paint a picture of their nightmare. Valkyrie team was pinned in a perfect L-shaped ambush, enemy fire pouring down from a steep ridge to their north and from a cluster of mud brick compounds to their west. They were trapped in the kill zone, their escape routes cut off by interlocking fields of fire. Ava's wingman, Captain Dan Miller, call sign Paladin, had just aborted his first gun run. Valkyrie, Paladin. The angle is no good. I'm taking heavy ground fire. Pulling off! The frustration in Miller's voice was palpable. He was a good pilot, a by-the-book officer, but the book didn't have a page for this topographical death trap. Eva's mind, however, worked differently. She saw the geometry of the battlefield in 3 dimensions, a mental map inherited from a past she never spoke of. She saw a narrow alley of air, a suicide run between 2 ridgelines that would put her in the enemy's lap for mere seconds, just long enough. Her voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos on the net. Valkyrie Actual, this is Iron Wolf. I have a solution. Low-angle gun run from the east. I can suppress the ridge position. The silence that followed was heavier than any G-force. It was a silence filled with doubt, with institutional bias, with the unspoken words that had followed her throughout her career. Then Miller's voice cut back in, sharp with paternalistic alarm. Iron Wolf, abort that run! I say again, abort. The risk is unacceptable. You'll fly right into their primary kill zone. It was the voice of a superior treating a subordinate, of a man protecting a woman he saw as a liability. It was the final, infuriating echo of being called Cadet in the officers' club, of being the last picked for training simulations, of being the diversity hire in a world of hardened warriors. Her knuckles tightened on the control stick, her grandfather's old Zippo lighter a cold, hard weight in her flight suit pocket. On the ground, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus heard the exchange as his world dissolved into tracers and dirt. He saw his medic, Corporal Jenkins, take a round in the leg, his scream cut short by a gritted teeth. He saw the young private next to him, no older than 19, praying aloud between ragged breaths. He looked up at the sky, knowing the 2 A-10s were his only chance, hearing one pilot offer a solution and the other dismiss it out of hand. He didn't know Iron Wolf from Adam, but he knew a good plan when he heard one. He knew desperation. And in that moment, he chose to trust the voice that offered hope over the rank that offered caution. He keyed his mic, his voice a gravelly beacon of absolute authority that cut through the doubt, the bureaucracy, the fear. All stations, Valkyrie Actual. Iron Wolf, stand by. He took a breath, the smell of cordite and dust filling his lungs. I say again, Iron Wolf, you are cleared hot. We trust your eyes. And with those words, the fate of 13 men, 1 woman, and the legend of Iron Wolf was sealed. The trust of a dying Marine was a weight heavier than any G-force. Ava's training, drilled into her through thousands of hours, took over. Copy Valkyrie Actual. Iron Wolf is in. She pushed the throttle, her A-10, a 30-ton beast of vengeance, descending into the valley's maw. The threat warning system screamed its shrill alarm, a missile lock from the ridge. She dumped chaff and flares, the sky behind her blossoming with false targets. She ignored it. Her world was the HUD, the targeting pipper aligning with the enemy position. She could see the muzzle flashes now, tiny winks of deadly light from the rocks. 30 seconds to impact, she said, her voice unnervingly calm for the men below. She was flying straight into the dragon's mouth. The ground fire intensified, tracer rounds weaving a tapestry of death around her cockpit. She felt a round punch into the left wing, a dull thud that vibrated through the airframe. A warning light flickered. She held her course. For the Marines, the sound started as a distant, high-pitched whine, growing rapidly into a deafening roar. Then came the sound of hell itself. Bot! The GAU-8A Avenger. 30mm cannon unleashed a 1-second burst, 70 rounds of depleted uranium tearing into the ridgeline. From the ground, it was a biblical plague. The rocky outcrop where the enemy machine guns had been simply ceased to exist, replaced by a cloud of pulverized stone and dust. The incoming fire from the north stopped. A ragged cheer went up from Valkyrie team. Good effect on target. The JTAC yelled, the relief palpable in his voice. Shift fire to the western compounds. Danger close. We are 50 meters east. Copy shifting, Eva responded, already pulling the Warthog into a steep banking turn, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. The maneuver was violent, brutal on the damaged airframe. She could hear the strain in the metal. Iron Wolf, your bird is trailing smoke, Miller's voice came through, tight with concern. Break off. I can take the next run. Negative, Paladin, Eva said, her eyes fixed on the cluster of buildings now filling her view. I'm committed. She had a clean line. The compounds were a maze, but the JTAC had painted the main enemy strongpoint with an infrared laser. She saw the diamond of her targeting pod settle over the building. Another burst from the cannon. The burst was shorter this time, a precise surgical strike. The roof of the central building disintegrated, the walls collapsing inward. Secondary explosions erupted as enemy ammunition cooked off. The western flank was silenced. As she pulled up, a streak of fire lanced up from a hidden position near the village. A rocket-propelled grenade. It wasn't a guidance system lock, just pure dumb luck. It missed the fuselage but detonated close to her damaged left wing. The A-10 shuddered violently, like a beast in its death throes. A cascade of new warning lights illuminated the cockpit. Master caution. Engine fire. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Mayday! 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 Eva called out, fighting the stick as the plane tried to roll. Iron Wolf is hit. I've lost engine 1. Multiple system failures. Eject, Eva! Eject now! Miller shouted, the professional calm gone, replaced by raw fear. Below, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus heard the Mayday call. His heart sank. Their angel of mercy was falling from the sky. He saw the A-10 trailing a thick plume of black smoke, lumbering like a wounded animal, struggling for altitude. He keyed his mic, his voice low and steady, a final anchor for the pilot who had saved them. Iron Wolf, Valkyrie Actual, we have you visual. You're clear to the east. Just get that bird home. And thank you. Eva's hands flew across the console, executing emergency procedures. Engine fire suppressant. Confirm engine shutdown. Cross-feeding hydraulics. The plane was sluggish, but it was still flying. She wasn't going to eject. She wasn't going to leave her plane to crash and potentially kill the men she just saved. She had one engine, limited control, and a long, painful flight back to base. Valkyrie Actual Iron Wolf, I'm not done yet. See you at the party. She began the slow, agonizing turn, pointing the nose of her wounded warthog toward home. Each mile of victory wrested from the jaws of disaster. The silence in the cockpit was deafening, broken only by the frantic beeping of the master alarm and the ragged single-engine whine that now powered the wounded aircraft. Every vibration through the control stick felt like a death rattle. Eva's world had shrunk to a few glowing instruments, her hands a delicate, constant dance on the stick and throttle, coaxing, pleading, commanding the crippled warthog to stay in the air. Hydraulic pressure was falling. She had maybe 10 minutes of controlled flight left. The mountains, once a tactical problem, were now looming tombstones. She had to find a flat spot, and fast. Iron Wolf, Paladin. I'm on your wing. Talk to me, Eva. Miller's voice was tight, stripped of its earlier condescension, replaced by a raw, professional urgency. He slid his own A-10 into formation off her right side, his eyes scanning her plane. The damage was bad. The left engine was a shredded mess, trailing a banner of black smoke. Fluids leaked from the torn wing. "I've got you, Eva. Just follow my lead. We're going to get you down." "Copy, Paladin," Eva breathed, her focus absolute. She couldn't afford the luxury of fear. Every ounce of her being was poured into the feel of the aircraft, the subtle feedback through the controls that was the only thing between her and a fireball in the mountains. "Hydraulics are at 20%. Flight controls are degrading. Roger, dump your munitions. Jettison everything. We need to get you light." Eva's thumb hovered over the jettison button. It felt like admitting defeat, throwing away millions of dollars of ordnance. But it was weight, and weight was death now. She pressed it. The remaining bombs and missiles fell away from her wings, tumbling into the empty valleys below. The aircraft lurched upward, feeling instantly lighter, more responsive. Good, Eva. Now listen. There's a FOB, Forward Operating Base Rhino, about 30 miles east. It's a dirt strip, but it's flat. It's your only shot. You're not making it back to Kandahar. "Rhino, copy." She adjusted her course, the plane protesting with a shudder. The altimeter was unwinding, slowly, relentlessly. She was losing altitude, and there was nothing she could do about it but manage the descent. The radio crackled again. A different voice. The air traffic controller at FOB Rhino. "Iron Wolf, Rhino Tower. We copy your situation. The strip is clear. Winds are light and variable. Emergency crews are standing by. We are tracking you on radar." The formality of the transmission was a comfort. It was the machine of the military working as it should, a net to catch her when she fell. For the next 20 minutes, it was a ballet of pure, terrifying skill. Miller talked her down, his voice a steady mantra. "A little left aileron, easy, easy. Watch your rate of descent. You're doing great, Eva, just great." The landscape below changed from jagged peaks to rolling, arid foothills. Then she saw it. A brown gash in the earth, a dirt landing strip looking impossibly short, impossibly narrow. It was a postage stamp. "Gear down," Miller instructed. Eva pulled the lever, a worrying groan, then a thud as the landing gear locked into place. The drag was immediate, the plane sinking faster. "Flaps, 20%. She complied, the aircraft shaking violently. "I'm losing her, Dan," she said, the first crack in her composure. The controls were getting mushy, the hydraulic fluid nearly gone. "You are not losing her," Miller barked, his own plane so close she could see his helmeted head in the canopy. "You are Iron Wolf. You own this sky. Now fly it onto the ground." The end of the runway rushed up to meet her. She cut the remaining engine, the sudden silence more frightening than the alarms. The Warthog dropped the last few feet, hitting the dirt with a jarring crash that slammed her harness into her shoulders. Dust and gravel exploded around the cockpit, blinding her. She stood on the brakes, feeling the tires skid and grab on the uneven surface. The plane, ungainly and heavy, careened down the strip, veering slightly to the left. She fought the failing controls, muscles straining. The end of the runway was coming up fast, a line of barbed wire, and beyond that, nothing. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive aircraft shuddered to a stop. The nose wheel was mere feet from the wire. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the pinging of hot metal. Then, the cockpit was surrounded by emergency vehicles, their lights painting the dust in flashes of red and white. She saw firefighters, medics, ground crew all staring up at her. As she went through the shutdown procedures, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading, she saw a familiar figure pushing through the crowd. It was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus, his arm in a sling, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He looked up at her and then, slowly, deliberately, he brought his good hand up in a crisp, perfect salute. The ground crew fell silent. One by one, the firefighters, the medics, the other soldiers all followed his lead. They stood in the swirling dust of the Afghan desert, saluting not the officer, not the woman, but the pilot, the one who had come when called, the one who had refused to leave them, Iron Wolf. The silence after engine shutdown was a physical presence, thick with dust and the scent of burnt metal and hydraulic fluid. Ava's hands, which had been so steady moments before, now trembled as she unclasped her helmet. The reality of what had just happened crashed down upon her with a weight more immense than any G-force. She had almost died. She had almost failed. Pushing the canopy open, the dry, hot air of Afghanistan hit her face. The faces staring up at her from the tarmac were a blur of grim respect. Then she saw him. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus, his arm bound in a crude sling, his combat fatigue stained with dirt, and what she feared was blood. His eyes, however, were clear and intent, locked on hers. He held his salute, a statue of gratitude in the chaos. Slowly, she returned the gesture, her own salute feeling small and inadequate. The spell was broken by the ground crew chief yelling orders. "Let's get her clear. Check for hotspots. Move, people!" A ladder was slapped against the side of her A-10. As she climbed down, her legs felt weak, like overstretched rubber bands. The solid ground beneath her boots felt foreign, unsteady. Miller was there, his own helmet off, his face pale. "Ava, Captain, that was the most insane, brilliant, stupid, incredible piece of flying I have ever seen." He shook his head, a bewildered look of sheer awe replacing the professional mask. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong." Before she could respond, Marcus was in front of her. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply stood there, his gaze taking in her soot-streaked face, her flight suit damp with sweat. "Captain," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "my team, 12 men are walking out of that valley because of you. We owe you." He reached into a pouch on his vest, his movements slightly stiff from his injury. He pulled out a small worn patch. It was the Valkyrie team patch, a winged helmet in silver and black. It was faded, the edges frayed from wear. "It's not much," he said, offering it to her. "But it's been with me through 3 tours. We'd be honored if you'd take it." Ava took the patch. The fabric felt heavy with meaning, with the weight of the lives it represented. It was a different kind of currency than the medals waiting back at headquarters. This was real. "Thank you, Gunny," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'll keep it safe." He gave a short, sharp nod, his business done, and turned to rejoin his men who were being loaded onto a waiting medevac truck. The formalities began then. The flight surgeon checked her over, pronouncing her shaken but miraculously unharmed. The maintenance chief whistled as he surveyed the damage to her aircraft. "Ma'am, they're gonna have to truck this one out. She'll never fly again, but she got you home. That's what matters, home." The word felt distant. Her real home was a world away, a small apartment with photographs on the wall. One of those photographs flashed in her mind. Her grandfather, stern in his Soviet uniform, a lifetime and an ideology away from where she stood now. He had never understood her choice to wear an American flight suit, but he had always understood the sky. Later, in the sparse, dusty operations tent, she sat for the preliminary debrief. The squadron commander, Colonel Jacks, had flown in from Kandahar. He was a tall, serious man with a reputation for being unforgiving. He listened to her report in silence, his eyes flicking from her face to the Valkyrie patch she had laid on the table between them. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Captain Rostova," he began, his tone unreadable, "you disobeyed a direct order from your flight lead. You engaged in a high-risk maneuver that resulted in the total loss of a multi-million-dollar aircraft." He paused, letting the weight of the statement hang in the air. Ava's heart sank. This was it. The institutional hammer was coming down. She had gone too far. Then the colonel's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You also saved 13 lives. The after-action report from Valkyrie Actual is glowing. It seems Gunnery Sergeant Marcus has quite the influential friend at Central Command, a general who doesn't take kindly to his best teams being written off." He stood up, picking up the Valkyrie patch and handing it back to her. "The official inquiry will be a formality. You're being put in for a Distinguished Flying Cross." He walked to the tent flap, then stopped, looking back at her. "And Captain? That call sign of yours. Iron Wolf, it fits. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He left her alone in the tent. The sounds of the fob, distant generators, the whump of a helicopter landing, filtered in. The journey back to her home base at Kandahar Airfield was a silent, surreal transition. The bone-rattling truck ride from Fob Rhino to a larger airstrip, the numbingly loud flight in a C-130 transport plane, the stark contrast between the dusty forward operating base and the sprawling, bustling main base, it all passed in a blur. Her body was back, but her mind was still in the cockpit, still feeling the shudder of the impacts, still hearing the desperate voice of the JTAC. The first person to greet her as she stepped off the C-130 was not a superior officer, but airman. First Class Jenkins, Valkyrie's medic, his leg in a cast, leaning heavily on crutches. His face broke into a wide, relieved grin when he saw her. "Captain, they said you were okay. I had to see for myself." He struggled to render a salute with one hand on his crutch. Ava gently waved it away. "How's the leg, Airman?" "They're sending me to Germany, ma'am. The docs say I'll keep it. Thanks to you?" The simple statement, devoid of any military formality, hit her harder than any official commendation ever could. She had saved his leg. She had saved him. As she walked toward the squadron headquarters, a subtle shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The ground crewmen she passed didn't just nod. They stopped what they were doing and looked at her, their expressions a mixture of respect and curiosity. A young crew chief, no older than 20, actually stammered, "Good to have you back, Iron." "Wolf, ma'am," before quickly turning back to his work, his ears turning red. The nickname, once a label she had to prove she deserved, was now spoken with a tone of reverence. The door to the squadron ready room felt heavier than usual. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The usual pre-mission chatter died instantly. Every pilot in the room turned to look at her. She saw Captain Miller sitting at a table in the corner. He met her gaze, held it for a long moment, and then gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't an apology, not in words. It was an acknowledgement. It was a passing of the torch. The room remained silent for a beat longer, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, the conversations resumed. But the energy was different. She was no longer on the outside. She was part of the fabric of the unit. Her commander, Colonel Jacks, summoned her to his office later that afternoon. The scene was far removed from the dusty tent at Rhino. His desk was neat, a computer humming softly, a framed photo of his family facing him. "At ease, Captain," he said as she stood rigidly before his desk. He picked up a file. "The initial after-action reports are in. The drone footage confirms your gun runs were phenomenally accurate. You took out 3 heavy machine gun nests and a significant enemy command element. The number of enemy KIA as a direct result of your actions is estimated at over 24." He closed the file and looked at her. "You disrupted a major Taliban offensive in that valley. This wasn't just a rescue, Rostova. This was a strategic victory." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "I've spoken with General Atwell at Central Command. He's a friend of the general who's father to Gunnery Sergeant Marcus. Let's just say your distinguished flying cross is the least of what's being discussed. There's talk of a Silver Star." Eva's breath caught in her throat. The Silver Star. The third highest military combat decoration. It was almost unheard of for a pilot who hadn't been shot down. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No, Captain," Jack said firmly. "You did more than your job. You redefined it. You showed this entire command what's possible when skill is paired with sheer, unadulterated courage. Your actions are being briefed all the way up the chain. You're a hero, Rostova. Get used to it." Dismissed, she walked out of his office in a daze. The weight of his words was immense. A hero. The word felt foreign, ill-fitting. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. She felt the ghost of every 30-millimeter round she had fired, the memory of the RPG streaking past her canopy. She made her way to her small, sterile room in the transient quarters. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she pulled out the 2 objects that anchored her: the faded Valkyrie patch from Gunnery Sergeant Marcus and her grandfather's tarnished Zippo lighter. She placed them side by side on her palm. The patch was warm from her pocket, a symbol of lives saved, of trust earned in fire. The Zippo was cool, a relic of a different war, a different allegiance, a legacy of conflict she had been born into. For years, the lighter had been a secret shame, a complicated inheritance from a man who fought for the other side. But as she looked at them now, lying together, she saw a new truth. Her grandfather hadn't fought for a political ideology. He had fought for his brothers in the sky, for his homeland, however flawed. She had done the same. She had fought for the men on the ground, for her wingman, for her country. The two legacies were not in opposition. They were the same. Courage was courage. Sacrifice was sacrifice. The uniform didn't change the heart of the warrior who wore it. A single clear tear traced a path through the dust still smudged on her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or of fear or even of relief. It was a tear of release. The long, lonely struggle was over. The ghost of her grandfather could finally rest, and the legend of Iron Wolf had just begun. The world beyond the wire of Kandahar airfield began to learn the story in fragments. A mention in a CENTCOM press briefing about a successful close air support operation. A vague, heroic quote from a Pentagon spokesman about the bravery of our aviators. But within the tight-knit ecosystem of the military, the story spread with the speed and force of a shockwave. It was passed along in emails from Gunnery Sergeant Marcus to his vast network of Marine buddies. It was dissected in pilot ready rooms from Djibouti to Nevada. The details were hazy, but the core of it was crystal clear. A female A-10 pilot, call sign Iron Wolf, had flown into the teeth of an ambush to save a team of Marines after her own flight lead had hesitated. Back home, the news trickled into Eva's small hometown. Her mother, who had always worriedly followed the news from Afghanistan, saw a brief clip on a cable news channel. The reporter spoke of a daring rescue, and though no name was given, her mother knew. She knew with the unshakable certainty of a parent whose child is in harm's way. She looked at the old photograph on her mantelpiece, the one of her stern father in his Soviet uniform, and for the first time she felt not anxiety, but a fierce, overwhelming pride. Her daughter had not rejected her grandfather's warrior spirit. She had redeemed it. At the Air Force Academy, where Eva had once been a cadet pushing against a different kind of resistance, an instructor read the after-action report that was now being circulated as a training tool. He stood before a new class of aspiring pilots, many of them young women who looked up at him with the same determined eyes he remembered in Eva Rostova. "This," he said, tapping the report on his lectern, "is what right looks like. This is the standard, not just for women, but for every single one of you. This is what it means to have the trust of those on the ground." In the squadron, the change was absolute. The word cadet was never uttered again. When she walked into the briefing room for her next mission assignment, the conversations didn't stop. They included her. Captain Miller, once her most vocal skeptic, now sought her counsel on flight profiles and tactical approaches. "What's your read on this, Ava?" he'd ask, and the question was genuine. She was no longer an outsider to be managed. She was a trusted asset, a weapon they had finally learned how to wield. The paperwork for her Silver Star was officially submitted. The citation, which she was required to read and sign, was a dry clinical document that failed to capture the terror, the noise, the smell of smoke, or the profound silence of Gunnery Sergeant Marcus's salute. But it was real. It was history. She signed her name, her hand steady. A week later, a formal ceremony was organized on the base. A stage was erected, flags fluttered in the dry wind, and rows of chairs were filled with personnel in their desert camouflage. It was for several awards, but everyone knew who the main event was. General Atwell himself had flown in to pin the Distinguished Flying Cross on her chest, a placeholder for the higher award wending its way through the bureaucracy. As she stood at attention, listening to the general read the citation, her eyes scanned the crowd. She saw Miller, his expression proud. She saw her squadron mates, their backs straight. And then, in the back, standing easily despite his arm still in a sling, was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus. He wasn't in his dress uniform. He was in his combat fatigues, having insisted on being discharged from the hospital to attend. He met her gaze and gave her that same slow, deliberate nod from the ready room. It was all the recognition she would ever need. The general finished speaking. He pinned the medal to her flight suit. The weight of it was insignificant compared to the weight of the Valkyrie patch she kept in her pocket. He shook her hand and the photographer's cameras flashed, but as the applause began to die down, the general did not step back. He leaned in close, his voice for her alone. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice low. "That was one hell of a piece of flying. But your war here is done. Your skills are needed elsewhere." He paused, letting the meaning sink in. "Pack your bags, Iron Wolf. JSOC is requesting you for a special assignment. It seems your particular talents have come to the attention of some very interesting people." He stepped back, rendering a final salute. The ceremony was over, but her mission was just beginning. A new path, one far from the dusty valleys of Afghanistan, was opening up. A path where the call sign, Iron Wolf, would be spoken in even quieter, more dangerous rooms. The world dissolved into a whirlwind of secret briefings and sterile, windowless rooms. The familiar, sun-bleached landscape of Kandahar was replaced by the anonymous corridors of a stateside Joint Special Operations Command facility. Her flight suit felt like a costume from a past life. Here she was given a new identity, a new cover story, and a chillingly simple mission profile. The man who ran the program was a retired colonel named Briggs, whose eyes held the flat, assessing look of someone who had seen too much. "Your exploit in the Hindu Kush was impressive, Captain Rostova," he began, not looking up from a file that she knew contained her entire life. "But it was also loud. This work is quiet. You will be a ghost. Your new call sign is Nightingale. You will fly unmarked aircraft into places that do not exist on any map. You will insert and extract assets without ever being seen. The A-10 was a sledgehammer. What we need now is a scalpel." The training was brutal, a psychological dismantling and reassembly. She learned to fly a modified, stealth-capable C-130 and a small, agile twin-prop plane that could land on a postage stamp. She practiced dead-drop insertions in the dead of night, flying nap of the earth to avoid radar, her stomach lurching as she skimmed treetops in total darkness. She was taught to withstand interrogation, to create and maintain a legend, to become someone else entirely. It was during a high-altitude, nighttime infiltration simulation over the rugged Nevada terrain that she felt the old, familiar thrill. The parameters were simple. Deliver a package to a designated coordinates without triggering a single simulated enemy sensor. The air was thin and icy, the world below a featureless black void. Her only guides were her instruments and the faint glow of her night vision goggles. She felt a presence more than heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air pressure. A shadow blotted out a section of stars for a fraction of a second. An enemy interceptor running dark. Her training kicked in. She didn't panic. She didn't try to run. Instead, she killed her own already dimmed lights and pushed the nose down, diving into a canyon so narrow her wingtips seemed to scrape the rock walls. She flew by instinct, by the feel of the air currents bouncing off the stone. She was no longer Eva Rostova or even Iron Wolf. She was a creature of the night, a whisper in the darkness. She emerged from the canyon miles away, the package delivered successfully on the high, desolate plateau. Back at the JSOC safe house, Colonel Briggs was waiting for her. For the first time, she saw something other than cold assessment in his eyes. It was the flicker of respect. "The pilot they sent us had a 5% success rate on that course," he said, his voice devoid of its usual cynicism. "You not only succeeded, you rewrote the profile. The Iron Wolf mentality. It translates. It seems a sledgehammer can be a scalpel if wielded by the right hands." He handed her a new file. This one was not a simulation. The photograph, paper-clipped to the front, was of a man she recognized from countless intelligence briefings. A high-value target, a facilitator moving weapons of mass destruction through Eastern Europe. The location was a dirt airstrip in a non-permissive country. The mission was simple. He needed to disappear. "This is your final exam, Nightingale," Briggs said. "Succeed, and you become a permanent asset. Fail." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Failure in this new world did not mean a failed mission report. It meant a shallow, unmarked grave in a foreign field. That night, alone in her sparse quarters, she took out the two talismans, the Valkyrie patch and her grandfather's Zippo. She looked from one to the other. The patch represented the warrior she had been, the one who fought in the light with thunder and fire. The Zippo represented the ghost in her blood, the one who understood shadows, sacrifice, and silent, desperate courage. She was both. The Iron Wolf was not gone. It had simply learned to hunt in the dark. She packed the two items away, her movements deliberate and calm. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was a familiar tool now. She was ready. The ghost was going to war. The air over the Carpathian Mountains was thick and heavy, a soup of cloud cover that swallowed light and sound. Ava, now known only as Nightingale, felt the familiar vibrations of the modified PC-12 turboprop through her gloved hands. The aircraft was a ghost, its surfaces coated in radar-absorbent material, its engine muffled to a low hum. Below her, the world was a map of shadows and pinpricks of light from remote villages. Her target was one of those pinpricks, a private airstrip used by a man named Koval, a merchant of death who specialized in chemical weapons precursors. Her mission was denial. Not capture, not kill, denial. Koval was meeting a buyer tonight. Her job was to ensure that meeting never happened, and that no trace of his cargo remained. The JSOC team on the ground, call sign Valkyrie 7 in a quiet homage she appreciated, had planted charges on the fuel depot and the hangar. Her role was to provide the signal. She circled at the edge of the cloud layer, a predator waiting for the perfect moment. Through her enhanced optics, she saw the headlights of two vehicles approaching the isolated airstrip. The meeting was beginning. Nightingale, Valkyrie 7. "Packages are in position. The guests have arrived. Awaiting your cue." The voice in her ear was calm, professional. It was not gunnery Sergeant Marcus, but it carried the same cool competence. She took a deep breath, the Zippo lighter a cold weight against her chest. "Copy, Valkyrie 7. Stand by." She pushed the control stick forward, descending through the cloud layer. The plane dropped like a stone, the wind screaming softly over its stealthy contours. She leveled out just above the treetops. Her navigation system synced perfectly with the ground team's lasers. The airstrip rushed toward her, a scar of pale gravel in the dark forest. She saw the two black SUVs, the men standing beside them. She saw the hangar, its doors open, revealing crates she knew contained horrors. This was the moment where the ghost had to become the hammer. "Nightingale is hot," she said, her voice flat. She toggled a switch. It wasn't a weapon. It was a single, powerful laser designator, painting the center of the hangar with an invisible beam of light. On the ground, that beam was the signal. Signal confirmed. "Fire in the hole!" The world below erupted. The charges on the fuel depot went first, a colossal fireball that lit up the night sky, turning darkness into garish, flickering day. A split second later, the charges on the hangar detonated, consuming the building and its deadly cargo in a secondary, even larger explosion. The shockwave hit her aircraft, rattling it violently. She didn't flinch. She pulled back on the stick, climbing away from the inferno, her eyes fixed on the burning wreckage below. There would be no bodies to identify, no cargo to trace. Just a tragic, unexplained accident at a remote private strip. A perfect denial. Nightingale, Valkyrie 7. Objective complete. All elements accounted for. Good effect on target. Copy. RTB. She turned the aircraft toward the west, toward a different, secret landing strip and the long debrief that awaited. There would be no medal for this. No ceremony. No one would ever know her name or her call sign. But as she flew away, leaving the firestorm behind, she felt a profound sense of completion. She had saved lives on a scale she could barely comprehend. She had prevented a nightmare. Months later, discharged from her JSOC duties under a blanket of secrecy, she found herself in a quiet park in Virginia. She wore civilian clothes. She looked like anyone else. A man sat down on the bench beside her. It was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus, out of his uniform, looking older but just as solid. He didn't look at her. He just stared out at the pond. "Heard you've been busy," he said quietly. She said nothing. He nodded, understanding the silence. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, flat box. He handed it to her. The team never forgot. "We had this made for you." Inside the box, on a bed of black velvet, was a new patch. It was a perfect fusion of her two worlds. It featured the Iron Wolf, its head raised in a silent howl, but it was silhouetted against a crescent moon, its form woven from shadows and starlight. Beneath it, in elegant script, were two words: Silent Wolf. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. No words were needed. He stood up, gave her shoulder a brief, firm squeeze, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She was alone again, but the loneliness was gone. She looked down at the patch in her hand, then touched the Zippo in her pocket. She was a ghost. She was a warrior. She was a legacy. She was whole. The story that began with a thunderous brrrr-tee in an Afghan valley had found its quiet, perfect ending in the silence of her own heart.